Okay, hello everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It looks like there are lots of people still joining us, but I'll let them go as I introduce myself and tell you a little bit about our program. As I said, thanks for joining us. I'm Mara Walsh. I'm the host today, which is usually a really easy job, except my biggest task is getting us live on Facebook, and I was just able to do that before you all joined, so hopefully the people that don't log into Zoom will be joining us live on Facebook, so we'll have an even bigger audience. Firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I started doing this. I am a group leader for EF Tours. I see a lot of people on this virtual tour actually that I know, and some of you that have joined us for virtual tours that we've done throughout the summer, and some of you that have even traveled before with me to Ireland with George. I'll share a little bit about my program. I started this program by taking Girl Scouts to international destinations each summer with their families and their friends, and I've since expanded my travel program. I've added adult-only tours as well as family-friendly tours. And you'll see by the slide that you see up right now that I have a website. It's called Girl Travel Tours. If you want to go check out our tours, our virtual tours, as well as our physical tours, feel free to. In the absence of physical travel, I thought it would be fun to start this virtual tours, and it's really taken off. We've done several in the past weeks. We've done Rome, Edinburgh, Paris, London, Peru, and I know many of you have joined us for those, but we have more coming in the weeks to come. We're doing Greece, Egypt, Spain. We just added Ecuador and the Galapagos, and I'll continue to add them. If you guys are interested in coming along, and as long as people show up for them, I will continue to add them, and not only, you know, give us the spirit of travel, but also give the tour directors some tips to boot, so it's all good. Again, that is girltraveltours.com. We also have a group on Facebook called Girl Travel Tours. It's a private group, but please feel free to join. And then just write in the comments that you were on a virtual tour with me, and I'll know that you'll be approved that way. Anyway, today we're off to Ireland, again with George, but before we get there, I'm gonna share a few things about the way you can interact with us. One, there is a chat mechanism on your menu bar. If you have an issue with how things are running, or you just wanna drop a comment, drop that in there and I'll answer you. Then we have the Q&A. The Q&A tab is really for questions that you want George to address at the end of the tour. So if you have a question specific to George that you want him to deal with on air, then please drop it in the questions field. Again, so you know the difference between the chat and the questions. Another way you can interact with us is via the poll mechanism. We're just gonna do a quick poll right now just to see what your background is in terms of Ireland, and to see how many of you have traveled there before. I'm going to launch the poll right now. Essentially, you can answer it. The question is, what's your connection to Ireland? I've been and love it. I have a trip planned. I plan to go in the future, or I'm solely interested in experiencing it virtually. And then there's an added feature, I've been there with George. So we're going to let you guys you can even answer that if you're just a George fan. You could put it in there as well. But you can, I'm going to give you a minute to answer that poll. I still see there's plenty of people. There's about 315 people or so on this call, and we're about 75%. So I'm going to end that poll. I'll share the results with you. It looks like, quite honestly, it looks like there's about half of you that plan to go in the future, and about 30% that have been and love it. So that's really great. You can see the results. I'm sharing them with you now. Whether you plan to go in the future or you're just here for the virtual aspect of the tour, it's all good, because George will enhance your knowledge of that tour today, and he'll give you some back-end stories that will really give you a new perspective on Ireland as well. So without further ado, a tour would not be complete without a fantastic tour director. A tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with your group from start to finish. They meet you at the airport, they're there with you every day, and they take you back to the airport at the end. They make sure that you have no worries. They handle all the logistics, and they make sure that your experiences are full of lifelong memories. So you can imagine if we're not traveling, our tour directors are not working. So I'm hoping this virtual tour not only reignites our passion for travel, but allows a great tour director to do what he does best, which is share his knowledge and passion and earn a little bit of tipping while he's doing so. One of my absolute favorite tour directors, many of you know, just happens to be an expert on Ireland and was excited to come back for his second virtual tour this summer. I'm honored to introduce you to and hand over this tour to our amazing tour director, Geoge McFall. And George, you can take it from here. You can share your screen and take it away from me, and then you can get going.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Bear with me while I try and share this. Okay. Bear with me, please, everybody. Hi, everybody. How are you all? Nice to see you again. 5 of you I was in Ireland with last summer, I gather. I hope you're all well. And everybody else that I don't know, I hope you're all well. 50% of you haven't been to Ireland before. I hope that I can cover a little bit of things to see in Ireland. Ireland is a big country. We've got about 40 minutes to try and cover what I'd normally do in 8 days. So what I was planning on doing is giving you a little bit of an overview of Ireland, the history, talk about the people, the most important thing in Ireland, the food, the drink, and the culture. And then I was going to talk you around Dublin and then try and head down through Cork, Killarney, and maybe even Galway at the end if we get a chance. Okay, so I'm going to launch into it now because I don't want to, I'm going to overrun as things are, but thank you very much for joining me here, everybody. And thank you very much to Mara as well for organizing this. It's been fantastic and a real lifeline to me and colleagues of mine who've been doing it. So to start off with, I would like to say, as it says on the slide, Céad Míle Fáilte. Céad Míle Fáilte is Irish, and it means 100,000 welcomes. In Ireland, they have 2 languages. They have English and they have Irish. Irish is also known as Gaelic. And here you can see on road signs in Ireland, they have information in English and then in Irish as well. So Dublin, you can see the Irish for Dublin is Ath Cliath. And Irish is officially the first language of Ireland, but more people speak English. There's certain parts of Ireland where Irish is the first language, but generally English is the first language. But Ireland is fiercely proud of its Irish language, and Ireland is now the Republic of Ireland. Most of the island of Ireland is its own country, and it has been since 1922. Before that, for years and years, one of the mainstays of Irish history is subjugation by the horrible English, which I'm slightly English. I'm half Irish, half English. I was brought up in Scotland, so I would like to think that I can give you a nice neutral perspective here. But the Irish language is very much part of their cultural heritage, along with the music and the art and things like that. Here is a picture of Ireland from above. You can see it's an island off the west coast of Britain. It's right at the western edge of Europe, next stop America over that way across the Atlantic. Ireland is relatively small. You're never more than 40 miles away from the sea in Ireland. And it's right in the middle of the Gulf Stream. So it's a very, very, very temperate country. In the winter, it never gets any colder than 40, never gets any hotter than 80. Well, it does sometimes, but rarely. Rarely colder than 40 Fahrenheit, rarely hotter than 80, which means that it's never too hot, never too cold, but what it really is, a lot of the time, is very wet. So it rains a lot in Ireland, but the good thing about that is you get lovely green countryside everywhere. That's why Ireland is known as the Emerald Isle, because it's lovely and green. But the reason why it's lovely and green is because it rains a lot. If you go to Ireland on holiday and it rains a lot, don't worry, because the rain doesn't last for very long. It constantly rains and then lifts. It's a very rainy country. The good thing about the rain is that I think the rain plays a big part in Ireland and the character of the Irish people. Because if you live in a country where it rains a lot, what's the best thing to do when it's raining outside? That's right, go to the pub. And that is why Irish people are such good company, and they're very very famously amusing people, very amusing playwrights and novelists are Irish, and they have a very specific sense of humor. I think it's quite a cryptic sense of humor. Sometimes when you're with an Irish person and they're being funny, it's almost like they're doing some abstract poetry or something like that. But anyway, this is, I like to think, because of the rain, like we stay inside all the time. Okay, so here's another map of Ireland, and you can see Northern Ireland in the northeast of the country. Northern Ireland is still part of the UK. This is for a reason to do with the history of Ireland. It's quite complicated. I could talk about it for 2 hours, so I'm going to have to do it very quickly over the course of this presentation. If anybody has more specific questions, ask me in the Q&A and I'll try my best to explain it. We're going to start off our tour in Dublin, and we're going to talk about the people of Ireland, the Irish people. Because like in England, the people of Ireland, they didn't come from one place, they came from all over. And all the people that settled in Ireland, over time, they all intermarried and interbred. And that's where we get the Irish people from. Some people arrived violently, others arrived peacefully. The first people around 8000 BC, we think came from Spain, around Galicia here. Some of them came from Spain. There's a lot of connection in the genes between people from Galicia in Spain and in Ireland. People also came from Scotland around this time. And it was these people that built this. This is New Grange. This is like Ireland's Stonehenge. It was built around the same time as Stonehenge, 3000 BC. It's absolutely incredible. If you're going to go to Ireland, here's my #1 tip. When you book your plane ticket, next thing you do, book your ticket for New Grange, because New Grange is very hard to get tickets. It's not like Stonehenge. They get booked out a long time in advance. So book your ticket for New Grange, and it's about an hour's drive from Dublin, just north of Dublin. And unlike Stonehenge, you can actually go inside it. It was a burial tomb for the kings of these Stone Age people in Ireland. And you can see here that they had their own very specific decorations. You don't get these in Stonehenge and in monuments from this similar era in England. And so already the Irish people, the prehistoric Irish people, had very much their own culture and their own character as well. The next people to arrive were the Celts. They arrived in around 500 BC. The Celts, what we think of as Irish music, like the music that was playing in the intro, the fiddly diddly music, came with the Celts. Also very specific, very, their own sort of design style, their own art, the language, the Irish language, the Celts. If you want to know what a Celt looked like, they looked a little bit like this. Only joking. They looked a little bit like this, okay? So beard, long hair, looked a bit like a hippie, okay? They looked a little bit like a hippie, and they came in around 500 BC, but unlike the hippies, they were very warlike, fierce, warlike people. And it's because of them that we have art like this. This is Celtic art, okay? Some of you may have Celtic art tattoos. I know lots of people do. Lots of people have regrettable Celtic tattoos from their youth. This is where they came from the Celts. And a lot of the Irish culture is Celtic. Next up, we've got the Romans. The Romans didn't come to Ireland. They got as far as England, and they looked across the sea and they said to somebody in England, "What's that over there?" And they said, "Oh, it's Ireland. It's even rainier and even colder than England." And the Romans said, "You know what? I think we're good." So they didn't go there, but they named it. They called it Hibernia, which means the wintry country, like Hibernia, like hibernate, or whatever. It was relating to winter. However, the Romans stayed in England, and lots of the English became Romanized. And one very famous English Roman who did go to Ireland was kidnapped by Irish pirates in the 4th century AD. Can you guess his name? I'm sure some of you know. This is him, St. Patrick. He was an English Roman Briton, and he went to Ireland around 400 AD. And he converted the pagan Irish to Christianity. You see him there holding the shamrock in his hand. Very famous story is that he converted the Irish to Christianity using the shamrock as an analogy for the Holy Trinity of Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. The other famous story about St. Patrick is this, that he banished the snakes from Ireland. Now, science tells us that the snakes were never in Ireland after the last ice age. The reptiles and amphibians never returned to Ireland after the last ice age. They may come back one day, who knows? However, the story of St. Patrick banishing the snakes, we think now, is a metaphor, because before the Irish converted to Christianity, they were pagans. So they worshipped the sun, the moon, and the priests of their religion were the Druids. And the Druids had lots of emblems with animals, with snakes on their shields, with deer antlers on, and things like that. So that was the symbolism of animals was very rife in the Druid religion. So when we say that St. Patrick cast the snakes out of Ireland, we mean that he cast the pagan religion out of Ireland, really. Here's a good example of the sort of thing that a Druid might wear with snakes on it. Ireland is still a very, very Catholic country. Okay, Catholicism is very important in the story of England, in the story of Ireland. Is what makes it, is one of many things that makes it very different from England and Wales and Scotland. Those countries all became Protestant in the 1500s. Okay, Ireland stayed Catholic, and to this day is very Catholic, at least culturally. As with lots of countries in the West, people don't really go to church anymore, but they identify as Catholic culturally, and it's played a big part in their history. I don't know if lots of you might not know this, but the history of Europe, a large part of the history of Europe is wars between Catholics and Protestants. Okay, we've been killing each other for hundreds of years because we had different ideas about how Christianity should be conducted. Ireland was a very Catholic country. Here's Pope Francis just a couple of years ago in Ireland, speaking to the masses there. Ireland used to be very Catholic. Now it's started to change, however. For example, 2015, gay marriage was legalized. That was unheard of in the 70s and 80s, okay? Also, 2018, abortion was legalized. I used to spend every summer in Ireland in the 80s, and like certain movies that would be released in the UK wouldn't be released in Ireland for religious reasons. So it's really changed a lot in those years. Okay, the first people to arrive in Dublin, sorry, we're going to talk about Dublin now, all right? But I'm going to carry on talking about the peoples because the first people who settled Dublin and made Dublin a town were the Vikings. Here you can see Dublin going out to sea. And Dublin, like lots of European cities, is built on a river. The River Liffey, as they call it in Dublin. And the Vikings founded Dublin and they sailed up the River Liffey and they built their settlement next to a pool, like a black pool. In fact, the name Dublin literally means black pool, Dublin, black pool. Here's the Vikings, terrifying, I'm sure you'll agree. And this is what Dublin would have looked like in 839 AD when it was settled by the Vikings. And all the towns on the coast of Ireland were Viking towns originally. The people who lived in Ireland before the Vikings lived throughout the land. They were more rural. So the Vikings lived there. This is what Viking Dublin looked like, allegedly. The houses were made out of wood. Next came the Normans. The Normans, those of you who were in London with me will remember the Normans were actually French Vikings who invaded England in 1066. 100 years later, 1169, they came to Ireland under this guy. This guy is the Earl of Pembroke, better known as Strongbow. And the Normans came to Ireland and invaded it. And the Normans were very, very technologically advanced warriors. Okay, so they basically dominated Ireland very quickly. They built castles and very soon they became the aristocrats of Ireland. But as with the Vikings before them, the Normans and the Vikings, they intermarried with the Irish and they became, as the expression goes, more Irish than the Irish. And they were also very Catholic and that worked very well. So this was fine up until this guy, Henry VIII, the English king. You might know him because of his 6 wives. But the important thing about him in the history of Britain and Ireland is that he converted England and Scotland to Protestantism. Before that, we were Catholic. In 1534, he made England a Protestant country, and suddenly England and Ireland were religiously at odds. England was at odds with France, with Spain. So Henry and his daughter Elizabeth, and all the kings and queens after them, they were very wary of Ireland because Ireland could be used by France or Spain to invade England. So they had to conquer Ireland as quickly as possible. So King Henry sent over his army. And this area around Dublin, this is where the English army was based and was based up until the 20th century, in fact. And this area all around Dublin is known as the Pale, okay? And there's mountains that go all around it here. And the English soldiers, basically they had control of the Pale, but they didn't have any control beyond the Pale. And that's where we get this expression from. Do you guys know that expression? It basically means when something is beyond accessibility, you say, oh, that's beyond the Pale. So that's where that expression comes from. And basically what happened then was Henry had a daughter, Elizabeth, and after her we had James I of England. he sent some Protestant aristocrats over to Ireland to try and make Ireland a Protestant country. He took the land away from the Catholics up here in the northeast. This was the best farming land in the whole of Ireland. He took the land off the Catholics and he moved in these Scottish and English Protestants. And that is where we get the Northern Ireland situation from, because those Protestants moved there in the early 1600s, and through the centuries they found themselves, they were at war with the Catholics in Ireland. And then when Ireland became an independent country, they didn't want to be part of Ireland. They wanted to remain part of the UK, and they thought the fairest solution was basically to let that part of Ireland remain in the UK, because after all, to be fair to them, their ancestors had been living there since the early 1600s, which is as long as Europeans have been in North America, for example. So they were well settled there. But this is where the conflict comes from. King James I moved the Protestants over there to try and influence Ireland. This guy, Oliver Cromwell, he was very nasty in Ireland's history. He slaughtered lots of Catholics. In England, some people like him because he killed our king, Charles I. He chopped his head off. So he was good for constitutional monarchy in England, not so good for Catholics in Ireland. He introduced the penal laws in Ireland, which meant that Catholics couldn't own property, they couldn't vote, they couldn't stand for parliament. They weren't even allowed to go more than 5 miles away from their house under these penal laws. These penal laws were only removed in 1829 by this guy, Daniel O'Connell. And he's almost like the Irish Abraham Lincoln, you could almost say. And he managed to achieve the repeal of these penal laws through peaceful means. So he's a great influence to people like Gandhi. And this street where you can see him is in Dublin, right on the River Liffey. You can see here on the Liffey, this bridge here, if you can see that, that's where the statue of Daniel O'Connell is. And now I'm going to show you the very same statue in 1917, because this is a very important date. Here's the statue of Daniel O'Connell in 1917. Now, what has happened? This is the most famous event in modern Irish history. It's called the Easter Rising of 1917. The Irish Republican Army, they had been under the subjugation of England and been ruled by Westminster. They've been ruled by London since 1801. And they basically wanted freedom. They wanted Ireland to be its own country. So they decided to seize control of Dublin. We call them freedom fighters now. At the time, they were probably called terrorists. But England was involved in the First World War, so the army was quite weak, quite scarce. So the Irish Republican Army took over the centre of Dublin, and in particular this building, the GPO, the General Post Office, and they read the Declaration of an Independent Ireland from the steps. It was lots of rebel leaders, people like Pearse, James Connolly, and the most famous one, Michael Collins, this guy. There's a great movie about all of this episode starring Liam Neeson and Julia Roberts. I highly recommend it. It's a great movie. Tells you everything you need to know about this event. Anyway, what happened was the English bombarded the GPO. You can see this is mostly the damage from the English. And the leaders of the rebellion were executed. Michael Collins managed to get away with it. And he formed an army, and there was a huge uprising against the English in Ireland, and eventually they had the 2 years of war, the Irish Wars of Independence, and eventually the English offered Michael Collins a deal, and they said, look, tell you what, you can have your Republic of Ireland, but Northern Ireland has to stay part of the UK, or else it's not fair on the Protestants who live there. Now, Michael Collins was under a lot of pressure from people on his own side to not capitulate to this deal with the English, but he decided to, and it cost him his life. A few months later, he was killed by people from his own side because of that decision. But that's why we get the Northern Ireland situation as it is. It is very possible that in our lifetime, we will see a united Ireland, because the whole Brexit question has brought up huge problems with the situation in Ireland, because people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. And now they're going to have to leave if they want to stay in the UK. So it's complicated, but watch this, it could get quite exciting. This is so as a result of that, Ireland got its own government. This is the current leader of Ireland politically. It's a guy called Leo Varadkar, and he is the Irish Taoiseach, which means the Irish, it's like the Prime Minister or President, okay? He's an interesting guy, he's half Indian, he's gay, he's the first gay Taoiseach in Ireland, which for a very Catholic country is quite novel. This guy next to him He is the president of Ireland. The president is a ceremonial position, much like the Queen in England. He's basically there to make sure that everything runs okay and the political parties don't fall out too much. The current president, this guy, is called Michael Higgins. He's very popular in Ireland. He lived in America for a long time. He's an academic and a poet. He's quite popular in Ireland. And whatever you do, do not compare him to a leprechaun, just because he's, vertically challenged. Now, Ireland also differentiates from the UK because Ireland is a member of the European Union. The UK left the European Union, but before that, Ireland adopted the euro. So it's a different currency in Ireland to England, Scotland, and Wales. They use the same currency as France and Germany and all those countries. And Ireland is a very loyal member of the European Union. It's done very well out of Europe, and Ireland's basically, for the first time in its history, become quite economically successful in the last few decades. And that's a real turnaround for a country that's had a very, very tough history. So it's great, really. And now Ireland, Dublin looks a lot like this. In the background of this photograph, we can see the Google offices. Lots of technology companies have their offices in Dublin because, quite apart from anything else, the Irish government offers them a really sweet deal tax-wise. So if you own a big multinational like Amazon, Google, Starbucks, you have your European headquarters in Dublin and you get to be a little bit nifty with tax. So as a result of which, Dublin's become the third most expensive city to rent in the whole of Europe. It's very expensive to rent a flat. Okay, drink and food. You'll see that I didn't write food and drink. We're going to start with the drink, okay, because it's Ireland, and we know that Ireland, well, the stereotype goes that Ireland likes to drink. So let's start with Guinness, shall we? Guinness is in Dublin, and the Guinness storeroom, this is the famous St. James Gate in Dublin. The Guinness storeroom, where the original Guinness factory was, it was started by a guy called Arthur Guinness. He bought this huge plot of land by the side of the Liffey River, there it is by the side, and he got a lease for 9,000 years for £44 a year. So he got a pretty sweet deal. And the other thing that he did that was very clever over the years was he marketed his beer. It's probably the best marketed drink in the history of the world, I would say. I don't know about you, but I don't think Guinness is that delicious, but it's the way they market it is fantastic. People say it tastes better in Ireland. It probably does marginally, because apart from so much Guinness in Ireland, the pipes are always very clean. If you go to the storeroom in Guinness, you see a whole exhibit of the history of Guinness, and then at the end you go to the Sky Bar. You get a great view of it over Dublin, and if you're old enough, or if you wish to, you have a pint of Guinness looking out over the city, which is wonderful. If you want to drink like an Irish person though, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, this is how you drink. You have 1 pint of Guinness and you have a Jameson in your other hand, okay? Jameson is whiskey. Whiskey is an Irish drink. It was invented in Ireland in the 12th century. The word whiskey comes from the Irish ushka. The monks, some Irish monks discovered whiskey, and they basically discovered the distillation process in the Middle East. They stole it off the Muslims who had used it to make perfume, and they thought, we could use that process to make some firewater. So they brought it back to Ireland and they made whiskey. It was stolen off them by the Scots, etc., etc. But in Ireland, the oldest distillery is this one, Bushmills. Bushmills is in Northern Ireland. It was opened by King James I in the 1600s. However, here you go. This is an example of politics in Ireland. If you are in Dublin, do not ask for a Bushmills, because Bushmills is Protestant whiskey, okay? And there's a chance that you will get told off if you ask for a Bushmills. In the Republic of Ireland, you drink Jameson, because that's good Catholic whiskey. And if you're in Northern Ireland in a Protestant area, don't ask for a Jameson, ask for a Bushmills, okay? As even your choice of whiskey is sectarian in Ireland. I'm afraid that's just how it is. The most popular drink in Ireland, however, is this, tea. There is more cups of tea drank in Ireland per capita than any other country in the world. This is a nice display here, Barry's tea, but that's not really what a cup of tea should look like. A cup of tea should look like this, okay? That's the perfect color for a cup of tea. You want it to look dark, like a sort of caramel color, or caramel, as you call it, okay? Sort of toffee colored, and that's tea. Here's an Irish stew. It's a very delicious stew. Traditionally, it would have been a stew made with mutton, with old sheep. Nowadays, because Ireland is doing better for itself, you have it with lamb. It's absolutely delicious. And of course, potatoes. You have potatoes with everything in Ireland. Potatoes 5 ways. And this is the other type of food that I love in Ireland. It doesn't look fancy, but it's delicious. Soda bread. Irish soda bread is fantastic. I would say the nicest bread in the world. The French make pretty good bread, but the Irish soda bread is very unique, and I miss it when I'm not there. Okay, so we're going to move on to culture now. Who's this guy? This is Oscar Wilde, okay? As I said before, the Irish are very famous for their wit, and also quite a literary brand of wit. It doesn't get more witty and literary than this guy. This guy was born in Dublin. His name is Oscar Wilde. He is a very famous playwright. He wrote The Importance of Being Earnest, was a very famous play by him, An Ideal Husband. He also wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a fantastic novel. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin. His father was a surgeon. His surname Wilde, this is a good example. Wilde is a Norman surname. Okay, so that shows you how the Normans integrated into Ireland. Wilde, Joyce, they're Norman surnames. O'Sullivan, O'Neill, Gaelic surnames. So Oscar Wilde, father was a surgeon. He moved to London, went to Oxford University, became the greatest wit in the whole of England. He's very famous for his witty quotes. He famously said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. And the other one he said is, try everything once except croquet and incest. Moving on, Oscar Wilde, he had a very sad end to his life. He was a gay man at a time when it wasn't allowed, you weren't allowed to be gay. And he was sent to jail for it and was basically broken by the system and died in Paris, quite relatively young. So a sad end to a story, but a fabulous writer. Highly recommend Picture of Dorian Gray. This guy, James Joyce, another good Norman surname. He wrote Ulysses. If any of you have read Ulysses, I'll be very impressed. It's a very difficult novel. Some people would say it's the first sort of modernist novel. It all takes place in one day in Dublin. I highly recommend it. Or maybe during the lockdown, you could get an audio tape of Ulysses and you can listen to it while you're doing your housework or doing your gardening. That's probably the perfect way to do Ulysses, actually. But it's fantastic, very witty, very cryptic. And finally, this guy, Yeats, Ireland's national poet, William Butler Yeats. He wrote a very famous poem about the Easter Rising, 1917. He's a great man. He's very interested in Irish folklore and mythology. And then later on in his life, he became very interested and invested in esoteric sort of magic and that sort of thing. And he wrote a very famous poem called The Second Coming. I could talk about Yeats for 2 hours, so I'm not going to, but it's fantastic. There's a great exhibition in Dublin all about Yeats at the National Library. If you do go to Dublin, go to the Yeats exhibition. These guys, music, this is U2, okay? U2 are like the gangster godfathers of Dublin. They run the town, okay? They're from Dublin. They own a hotel. This is the Clarence Hotel, owned by U2. Obviously, the singer of U2, Bono, very famous. There's the Edge playing the guitar. That was when he had hair still. And the Clarence Hotel, right on the side, right on the River Liffey, the Clarence Hotel. You can't miss it because of the turquoise penthouse. That's where people like Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, they all stay there as Bono's guests when they're in Dublin. And U2 are from Dublin. They met in a school called Mount Temple. They were all in school together in a class called 2U. That's where they got the name of their band from. Also, these guys, these are my favorite. Okay, the Pogues. The Pogues are like they're like the bad boys of Irish music. And they were around in the 70s, 80s. They were kind of half folk music, half punk. And they were very, very naughty, very badly behaved. The lead singer is this guy here, Shane MacGowan. The name, the Pogues, that's an interesting one. That's from Irish. It's from an Irish expression, which is this, Pogue Mahone. Now, I don't know, some of you might be quite young, but it's written on a pub, so I'm going to tell you. Pogue Mahone is an Irish expression. Pogue means kiss. Ma means my. I'll let you do the rest, okay? So the Pogues, and the lead singer here, Shane MacGowan, he is one of Ireland's great pin-ups, okay? So girls, this is Shane MacGowan, the lead singer of the Pogues. Oh, he looks a bit better now. He's had his teeth done. Okay, moving on. This is Trinity University. This is like Ireland's Oxford or Cambridge. It was started by Queen Elizabeth I, and it was a Protestant university. Catholics weren't allowed to go there. And even in the 20th century, women weren't allowed to study there until the 70s. Okay, so very conservative, very expensive to go to as well. There's a lot of American students do go to Trinity. It's very reputable. But what it's very famous for is it has one of Ireland's national treasures in it. And that is the Book of Kells. If you go to Dublin, you have to go to the Book of Kells. It's like going to London and not seeing the crown jewels, okay? The Book of Kells, it's like these old manuscripts that were done by monks in the 8th century in an island off Scotland. And they were taken over to Ireland to protect them from Viking raids. And these are Ireland's greatest national treasure. They're amazing. They're basically manuscripts of the 4 Gospels done in the 800s AD. Absolutely incredible. And when you're in Trinity, check out the library, Trinity Library. Some of you might recognize this because it was also used in the Star Wars movie, and it was the Jedi Library in the recent Star Wars movie. I can't tell you exactly which one. Okay, so now we are going to virtually travel from Dublin down to Cork. Okay, how am I doing for time? Sorry. Okay, so we're going to head through County Kildare, County Kilkenny, and we're going to head down to Cork. But on our way, you're going to see some landscape like this, okay? A lot of landscape in Ireland looks like this. This is what we call the bog, okay? The bogland of Ireland. And Ireland used to be covered in trees, but the trees were felled by humans, and over time, the vegetation basically turned into peat, all right? So it's slightly decomposed vegetation, which is then dried out and turned into fuel. And this has been fueling Ireland for centuries. And you can see here that they pile up the peat, and it used to be free fuel for the Irish. They'd just go into the countryside, dig up some peat, dry it, and then burn it on their fire. Nowadays, you can't do that anymore because of environmental issues. There's only a few places left where you can actually help yourself to peat in Ireland. It is protected now. If you go into a house in rural Ireland where they're burning peat, it's the most beautiful smell in the world. It's absolutely heavenly. My grandmother was Irish, and I associate it with staying in her little cottage in County Leitrim when I was young. Wonderful smell. Okay, on the subject of County Leitrim, which is here, these are the counties of Ireland. Okay, so this is Dublin, County Dublin. We're going to drive through County Kildare, drive through County Laois, County Tipperary. You might know this song. It's a long way to Tipperary. And we're going to head down to Cork here, or as the Irish call it, Cork. Okay, and also you can see here, this pink land here, these are the ancient kingdoms of Ireland, because it used to be lots of different kingdoms. So this is the Kingdom of Leinster, Kingdom of Munster, Kingdom of Ulster, and the Kingdom of Connaught. Okay, and these counties are very relevant when it comes to sport, okay, because the Irish sports, the counties play each other. So this is the most popular sport in Ireland. It is Gaelic football. It's a little bit like American football or rugby. You can kick the ball, you can throw the ball, and you have to get it either through the goal or through the posts above the goal. 15 people on each side. I don't know much about American football. I imagine it's fairly similar. The only difference being that, as you see, we don't wear armor, okay, because we're tough. The other sport in Ireland, which is really popular but really vicious, is this one, hurling, okay? It's like hockey in the air, but these bats that they're holding are really heavy, okay? And these guys are wearing helmets. You'll see the guy behind, he's not wearing a helmet. It's one of the most violent and dangerous sports in the world. If your head is in between the player and the ball, he's allowed to hit you around the head with his club. If you are Irish, if I was Irish, I wouldn't be delighted for my teenage son to be going to play hurling of an afternoon. But it's a very popular sport, very fast sport as well. Check it out on YouTube, maybe, if you're interested. Watch a bit of hurling. On to Cork. Cork, people from Cork like to think that Cork is like the main Irish city. As I said, Dublin is seen as the city where the English army stayed, okay? Cork is the real Irish city. That's what they call rebel country. That's where the Irish rebels lived. And it's a very, very beautiful city as well. I would highly recommend going there. Here's another view of Cork, and it's right on the River Lee, which goes out to the sea. Now, this whole part of Ireland is very important in a very tragic part of Ireland's history, which is called the Great As you know, there's a huge connection between Ireland and America. I always think that Ireland is much more similar to America than, for example, England or Scotland are. And there's a huge connection, which is because so many people emigrated from Ireland to America. And that was largely because of this next episode we're going to talk about, which is the Great Famine. This is a statue that represents the Great Famine in Ireland. In 1845, the potato crop, there was a blight, basically like a disease that affected all the potatoes, meant that nobody could eat potatoes. And this blight carried on for 5 years, okay, till 1849. And the potato was the staple food of the poor Irish, and there was a lot of poor people in Ireland. Population was around 8 million then, okay? The population of Ireland now is just under 5 million, okay, with another just under 2 in Northern Ireland. So it was many more people in Ireland then, and a lot of them were very, very poor, and they survived off the potato. And the potato in the whole of Europe was affected, but in Ireland they were very, very affected because of the English government. Basically, the English government had recently embraced free market economics, laissez-faire economics, and they decided, even though there was wheat and other crops being grown in Ireland, they decided that these crops had to be sent to England to trade. Okay, trade was more important in the lives of the Irish, and as a result of this horrible period in Irish history, 1 million Irish died between the years 1845 and 1849, and 1 million roughly emigrated, mostly to America. So 2 million in the population of 8 million, 1 million died and 1 million emigrated to America. Very, very tragic period in Ireland's history. And you could argue that Ireland's population has never fully recovered from the Great Famine. Some people used to call it the potato famine. We don't call it that anymore because we think it's quite a trite name for something really traumatic and serious. So it's the Great Famine, 1845 to 1849. And it particularly affected areas like Cork, okay, south west Ireland, which is very agricultural, very poor people living there. And a lot of the emigration took place from Cork, a place called Cove, right next to Cork. And this is a very famous statue of somebody called Annie Moore. And Annie Moore is, the statue here is with her brothers. And she emigrated to America at the age of 15. And she was the first Irish person to ever be processed at Ellis Island in New York. And there's an identical statue to this one in Ellis Island. I have never seen it. Maybe some of you have. I'd love to hear about it if you have. But it's a very famous emigre from Ireland, Annie Moore. And she's there to represent the million Irish that emigrated to America and make up so much part of not only your history, but also your culture as well. You know, if you think about American music, it's very influenced by Ireland, even, you know, down to your accent as well. So very connected, Ireland and America, in that way. Also on the outskirts of Cork is this, Blarney Castle. Blarney Castle is famous for one thing and one thing only, that's the Blarney Stone. The Blarney Stone is right at the top of the castle. You have to sometimes wait in line for about 2 hours if you're unlucky. And then you climb a very rickety staircase and you get to the top and this happens. You have to lean over a ledge. This man holds on to you so you don't fall to your death, and you kiss the Blarney Stone. And if you kiss the Blarney Stone, the legend goes that you are given the gift of the gab. The gift of the gab means that you get extreme eloquence and you become very eloquent, you're very good at talking, you're very witty, you're great company. Nobody knows where this legend started, but by Victorian times already, it had become a custom if you went to Ireland to go and kiss the Blarney Stone for the gift of the gab. There's many theories about how it started. One is that in the grounds of Blarney Castle, there did used to be a school for the Druids, for the bardic tradition. And the bards were the traditional prehistoric storytellers in Ireland, because the Druids didn't write things down, they passed information on verbally. So it was a school where you were trained in storytelling, and storytelling would incorporate singing and writing poetry and things like that. So they think there's a connection between those two, but nobody really knows, okay? But Blarney, yes, kissing the Blarney Stone, highly recommended. There's no truth in the story that the locals pee on it during the night, by the way. If you look at how it's positioned, it would be quite physiologically challenging. Okay, sorry, we're rushing now because I'm I'm keeping you from your dinner. Okay, from Cork, we're going to go to Killarney. Killarney is right in the southwest of Ireland. This is the most beautiful textbook Irish part of Ireland, okay? And Killarney is famous for this particular route called the Ring of Kerry. The Ring of Kerry is really beautiful Irish scenery, and this route you can do in 4 hours. You can drive around this route. I would suggest taking a little bit longer. You can stop along the way and see some of the sights. Things that you might see along the way, scenery like this, mountains, forests, more mountains. You get some very dark brooding. The highest mountains in Ireland are actually here in the Ring of Kerry. McGillycuddy's Reek is the name of the highest mountain. And you even get beautiful Atlantic beaches like this. I have actually swam in the sea on the Ring of Kerry during a tour once with some retired policemen from New Jersey. Charlie Chaplin had a house on the Ring of Kerry, and there's a statue of him here. His granddaughter Geraldine Chapman still lives in that house, so people like to get their photograph taken, but it's very beautiful scenery. There's so many things to see, but I'm going to tell you about one which is very exciting. That's this. These are called the Skelligs, and they're islands that are off the coast of the Ring of Kerry. The Ring of Kerry is a peninsula off the southwest of Ireland, and off the end of the peninsula there's these two rocks that come out of the sea. And in around the 4th century AD, some monks moved onto this Skellig, Skellig Michael, and they built a monastery essentially on a rock in the middle of the sea. This rock is so hard to get to. Even nowadays, you can only get there a few days of the year because it's really treacherous water. It's very hard to land there. And these monks lived there for centuries during the Dark Ages, a time which is a very dark time in Western civilization. And they built these staircases into the rock, and they lived in these little huts, and they grew some vegetables in the very thin soil they had in the rock, but they had to live off, seabirds, the odd fish, maybe some seafood occasionally, but very hard life off the west coast of Ireland, very wet and cold. And they lived there, and they preserved Christianity. This is a very important site in the history of early Christianity. If you come to Ireland, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to visit. It's very difficult to A, get permission, and B, find a day when the conditions are suitable. Some people that did get to go to the Skellig Islands, though, are George Lucas and his friends, because Skellig Michael, it was used in the recent Star Wars movies as the island where Luke Skywalker was living. So people get very excited about this on tours. I should warn you that when you come to the Ring of Kerry, a lot of the time you can't see the Skelligs, okay? Because of the weather in Ireland, you have to be a little bit lucky to be able to see the Skelligs off the coast. That's one good thing about this virtual tour. You get to see a great view like this. You get to see the staircase. But that's from the Star Wars movies, okay? The Skelligs. Okay, I'm going to have to rush this last bit because I'm running out of time. We're going to go from Killarney all the way up to Galway, okay? And the west coast of Ireland, for those of you who haven't been to Ireland, this is what I would say, really, okay? Dublin's nice and it's interesting, and there's a lot of good stuff to do there culturally. But the real Ireland, if you ask me, is here on the west. Okay, go to the west coast of Ireland as much as you can. Killarney, Galway is fantastic and beautiful. Even all around here is really beautiful, and it's not as touristic as some of the other areas, okay, around Sligo, Mayo, and up here in Donegal. Okay, but we're going to head to Galway. And on the way to Galway, one thing that you have to do in Ireland is visit the cliffs of Moher. They look like this, okay? Absolutely stunning cliffs that face all the way across the Atlantic Sea. Next stop, America, okay? And if you want, in fact, with Mara last year, we took a boat all around the cliffs of Moher. You can get a boat all around the cliffs. It's a fantastic view. Whatever you do, don't fall off the cliffs. Some people do sometimes. Very dangerous. Here's another beautiful view. Great for seabirds as well. And then we're going to carry on driving around virtually to Galway. On the way, we're going to pass through this area called the Burren, which is almost like driving through the moon, okay? It's this strange lunar landscape made out of limestone. Absolutely fascinating. And that's in between the cliffs of Moher and Galway. And then on the way into Galway, we're going to pass through lots of towns that have this sign outside. This sign, and Gaeltacht, means that you're entering a village or town that speaks Gaelic as its first language, okay? So talk English to these people at your peril, okay? In Gaelic, it's very easy. All you need to say is sláinte, that means cheers, all very easy. And then onwards to Galway, which is kind of where we're going to end this tour. Galway is a fantastic city on the west coast of Ireland. If you like Irish music, I would say Galway is the best place in the whole of Ireland for Irish music. All up and down this street here, you have these fantastic pubs with local musicians, and you have amazing Irish music schools in Galway, and they get people from all around the world who come and study Irish music there, and then they come and play in the pub for free, and the pubs are full of people. It's great fun. Being in Galway on a Friday, Saturday night, it's a great place to be, and I highly recommend it. Also, if you're in Galway, you can take a trip out to Connemara National Park, really beautiful sort of mountain landscapes in the west of Ireland. There's so much to see. If you have any questions, please ask me in the Q&A. I'm sorry that I've dragged on. There's only one more thing for me to say, and it's this: Slán a Bhéile, and that is Irish for farewell. Peace be, go safely on your journey. And I'll tell you one interesting thing about Slán a Bhéile, which I find interesting, is, in English, like if you watch a John Wayne movie, when he's saying goodbye, he says, "so long." The expression "so long," if you think about it in English, it doesn't really make much sense to say "so long" to somebody as a way of saying goodbye, does it? But it actually comes from the Irish slán. Slán, so long, farewell, okay? And I did have a piece of music to share with you, but I think that Zoom has made it difficult to share this piece of music with you. This is what I would recommend you listen to. Okay, we're going to try and listen to this. If it goes wrong, then we will go straight to the Q&A. This is the Pogues that I was telling you about, and this is a fantastic song by them called "If I Should Fall from Grace with God." And when I have a group in Ireland, I always start off the tour with this song because it's very wild, and it makes me think of Ireland and the Irish character. So we're going to play this song, and then we're going to do the Q&A, okay? Thank you again very much for coming on this virtual tour with me. Thanks again to Mara for inviting me. Okay, here's the Pogues.
Okay, George, I'm going to cut in because I think the audio is not transferring.
Okay.
However, I'm going to play it from my perspective for a minute.
Okay. Yeah.
See if I can get the audio to go with it, which would be great.
Sure.
I'm going to share the question tab so everybody knows what they can do in terms of asking a question. But I'm going to share a little bit of this music if I can. And George, you can tell me if you can hear it from this end.
Okay, I can hear it. I can hear it now.
Mamma mia! Going up.
Of course. So we'll just skip through the ad.
I shall fall for grace of God, where no doctor can relieve me. If I'm buried beneath the sod, but the angels know the sea. Let me go, boys, let me go, boys. Let me go down in the mud where the rivers are dry.
Okay, so you can get a little bit of the spirit here, and I can tell you that when you travel with George, every single stop is accompanied by music, and it just gets all of us revved up, and we absolutely love it. It's a really unique perspective with touring, and it's a really wonderful thing that I've only seen George do. So if you ever have the opportunity, let George lead you somewhere, and it's surely going to be accompanied by music. I can't thank George enough for joining us and sharing his interesting facts and his fun tidbits, along with his sense of humor that I know is shoved in there very quickly, but I'm sure most of you get it. Please take the time to use the Q&A right now and put your questions in. And you see my phone is ringing and someone wants to talk to me. All right, so if you don't mind, put your questions in. George, you can put the question and answer bit up so that you can start to see them coming in so that you'll know what to address.
Yes.
Just a little bit about the tipping. As you'll see this, I always say that it's a good idea to just take a screenshot of the screen that's up right now, so that you can see where you should send the tips. And I've also copied it and pasted it into your chat so that you can see that as well. So you have that backup. You'll also get a thank you email tomorrow, which will give you a direct information about the tipping. If you're interested in my tours, virtual or physical, they are available for you to review on girltraveltours.com. And I'll mention it once again, if you want to join our Facebook group, we're a very lively group and we share a lot of things while we're on tour as well as while we're not. That's a private Facebook group, Girl Travel Tours, and just mention the fact that you joined our virtual tour, and I'll approve you for that. So I think I've taken enough time to stall so that George can get into the Q&A. And I'm going to hand it back over to George so that he can address the questions.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. First off, Mark Burnkopf, you were right. My great shame. The Easter Rising was in 1916, not 1917. You're completely right. I'm afraid that one of the pitfalls of my job is that we get in a muddle all the time. Our brain goes into malfunction. We have so many dates racing around all the time that you're completely right. It's 1916 uprising, not 1917. I was in Dublin in 2016 on the anniversary in Easter, so I should know that. I'm very sorry. Completely correct. 1916 Easter Rising. What was the name of the movie with Liam Neeson about the Easter uprising? It was called Michael Collins. That was the name of the leader of the Irish Republican Army. Friends have said that most meals available on tour were meat and potatoes. Are vegetarian options readily available? Grilled or baked fish are the healthy options? Thank you. Yes, there are vegetarian options available. However, it must be said that in Ireland, there is a lot of meat and potatoes, okay? But of course, you can have vegetarian options. In a big city like Dublin or Cork, obviously you're going to have better options than in other places. My favorite vegetarian restaurant in the whole world is in Dublin. It's called Cornucopia and it's on Wicklow Street. If you go to Dublin, go there. Okay. What's the proper way to drink Irish whiskey and beer? Shoot it or sip it? Sip it. You gulp the beer and you sip the whiskey if you're old enough, or if, you know. As a tour guide, which cities have you traveled to? Which ones would you recommend? I have traveled to lots and lots and lots of cities, too many to list. Which would I recommend? Oh, I love Rome. Rome is fantastic. I love Paris. I love, Ireland. So many. Too many to list. Prague is great. Okay, what's the best way to research my family ancestry in Ireland? 3 of my great-grandparents' families both emigrated from County Cork. There will be a website that you can trace it. I don't know exactly in Ireland. In Scotland, there is a special department where you can look it up. If you look it up online, I'm sure you'll find something. When we were there last, about 5 years ago, I was surprised to see the locals drinking cheap American beer. Any comments on that? It's probably because they had to drive home afterwards. And as we all know, you can drink American beer and drive. I'm only joking. Yes, in Ireland, as I said, they're culturally very close to America. So I find in Ireland, you see a lot more people drinking Budweiser than in, say, England or Scotland. Can you please spell Cliffs of Moher? M-O-H-E-R. Is Northern Ireland a completely different experience? Yes and no is the answer to that. It looks quite similar to Ireland, but culturally it's quite different because of the Protestant aspect. I love Northern Ireland. I highly recommend visiting Northern Ireland. Go to Belfast, go to Derry. It's a beautiful country. The Giant's Causeway, amazing. So I can't recommend Northern Ireland enough. Thank you very much, Laura. Pamela. Never enough time. Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you, Pamela. Maria, I am a druid in New Jersey. Do you do pagan spiritual tours? I don't, but I could give it a go. Do you have ancestry tours? I I have never done one, but they are available, but not with the companies I work for, I don't think. Look it up online. I'm sure you'll find one.
They do actually. Go ahead, offers.
Oh, they do. Apparently they do. EF do. Sorry, EF. How is the relationship between Northern Irish people with the rest of Ireland? Pretty good. Things are pretty good now. They've had peace in Northern Ireland, relatively speaking, since the 90s, the Good Friday peace agreement. When I was a child, there used to be a physical border with army. The British Army were there with guns and things. It was a war zone, but that's long gone. That's been gone since the 90s. So everything's pretty good now. Are kilts Scottish or Irish? Scottish. My wife and I visited Ireland in 2009. We're going back in 2022 as part of an adult group with Go Ahead. I could be a tour director. I work for Go Ahead. Fingers crossed. Why didn't you request me? What's the number one thing that has changed in the past decade that we should see or experience? Well, not the past decade, but again, I would go back to Northern Ireland thing. I'd say go to Northern Ireland, because actually it's amazing going to Northern Ireland now compared to as recently as the early 90s. Northern Ireland is the answer, the relationship between the two countries. What's your favorite undiscovered or less touristy spot? Okay, here's a good answer, because when I toured with Mara last year, we actually went to the islands, the Aran Islands, just near Galway. You can get a boat out to the Aran Islands if the weather's okay. I would recommend going to the islands, the Aran Islands, okay, off the west coast. Amazing. We were there last year. It was like being in Greece. It was baking sunshine. We like to stay at places for a while. 2 weeks in Ireland or too long? Definitely not too long. Fantastic. Too long. 2 weeks, 2 months even. I could do 2 months there. What do you think of the quality of Magna's hard cider? I don't drink cider, but people that do like it. I believe it makes you quite squiffy, is my only warning. If we've done this tour, Mara, will we hear about other tours? That's the question Mara can answer afterwards. I lost one of my favorite Book of Kells scarf that I bought at Trinity College. Any suggestions how I can replace it? Look it up online, or even phone Trinity College. Phone Trinity College. They're not going to be busy right now. Find a telephone number and phone them or email them. I'm sure they can accommodate it. Irish people are very accommodating. How is Sally Rooney as an author considered in Ireland? And what about Sligo? Okay, did you guys get that series Normal People? In Britain, during the COVID lockdown, Normal People was the TV series that everybody was talking about. It's quite rude. Any young people watching, don't watch it with your parents. It's very, it's quite rude. But it's set in Trinity College, a lot of it, the university that we saw, and also in Sligo, which is up the west coast, further north from Galway. Sally Rooney, yeah, very, very loved in Ireland and Britain. She is the author of the moment. What park was featured in P.S. I Love You? Don't know, I haven't seen it, but I imagine it's Phoenix Park. That's the big park in Dublin. That was where the Pope was in that photograph. How long does it take to get from Dublin to Cork and to the west coast? Let's live 4 hours. Dublin to Cork, live 4 hours. And then the west coast, another 2 hours. Besides Galway City, are there other towns in the west that are great centres for trad music? Galway is the famous one, but all around the west coast is fantastic. What is a good Irish dessert? Let me think about that. Lots of good things, lots of good desserts. No, I can't think of a very specific one though. What's the best time of the year to visit Ireland? Spring, summer. Yeah, I mean, it's Ireland, it's Northern Europe, so you could get lucky, you could get unlucky, but I would say, yeah, April to August, you're in with a good chance for good weather. Do Irish folks eat too much spicy food? I wouldn't say so. No. Where was Wuthering Heights set in Ireland? It wasn't set in Ireland, it was set in Yorkshire in England. What season, time of year is best if you accept it's rainy but would like fewer people and have access to cultural activities? Well, maybe the autumn. Try the autumn. Try September, October. But don't blame me if it rains. Due to the dampness there, are there many bugs? Not that many, actually. Scotland's quite buggy, but Ireland's not too bad. Will there be a tour available for Ireland and Oberammergau? The Passion Play in 2022. Sorry, I thought that was an Irish word. I don't know, very probably.
No, they're not combining that.
They're not combining that. Mara knows more about EF than I do. How can we find Geoge McFall? I'm right here. Are there still a lot of gypsies in Ireland? There certainly are. Now, the gypsies in Ireland, I could talk about that for a long time. In Ireland, they don't call them gypsies, they call them travellers. And there's a huge traveller communities all around Ireland, especially around the town of Limerick. Okay, yes, around Limerick especially, and you see them, and they still travel in huge groups of caravans. Have you guys seen My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding? Those are what Irish travellers are like now. I don't know if you have that TV series in Ireland. Does an American accent sound out of place in Northern Ireland? Not really, because there's a lot of tourism in Ireland. So no, you're very, very welcome. People love the Americans in Ireland and Northern Ireland. George, thank you so much. I was in Florence, Italy, and broke my leg and had a spinal. I was to leave for Ireland in 4 weeks when I came back. How far is Dublin to Galway? I would say, yeah, 3 to 4 hours is my guess. What castles are a must-see in Ireland? Okay, Blarney Castle is the first one that springs to mind. That's a Norman castle. That's very near Limerick as well. Blarney is a great castle. There's another fantastic castle near Galway, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Dublin Castle in Dublin, not such a great castle. That's more of a military barracks. Malahide Castle near Dublin, that's a great castle. What is the origin of Irish names beginning with Mac and O? Well, Mac and O basically means son of. Okay, so O'Sullivan means of Sullivan. Mac means, yes, son of. My surname is Fall, so my surname is son of Fall. What is EF? EF is a company called Education First, which is a company that I work for, and Mara operates tours through. It's a big company. You can look them up online. They organize school trips and other trips all around Europe. It's a big company, and you can get custom tours made for yourself or join other tours any part of Europe or the world, in fact. Again, Mara can probably fill you in. She's better informed than I am about the EF prospectus. Dromoland Castle, says Marie. Never been, but I'm sure it's wonderful. Normal People is huge in Canada, says Kathleen. Okay, I only watched one episode, and my mum and dad were in the room, and I got very embarrassed. But I thought it was very good. The director of Normal People made a great movie called Adam and Paul, set in Dublin. I recommend that. What is your favorite Irish cologne? I don't know the answer to that, sorry. I don't know any Irish colognes, sorry. Any comment on the importance of horses in Ireland? Historical, economic. The only thing that I would say about horses in Ireland is that they're very big in the traveling communities. There's a great movie called Into the West about two travelers who travel on their horse through Ireland. Also travelers in some areas of Dublin, like you get like in the projects in Dublin, in the outskirts, you still see people with horses going into like blocks of flats on horseback. So you do still see a lot of horses in Ireland, yes. Is Ireland better now since March? Ireland has done very well during the COVID pandemic. Ireland has had very low numbers, actually, certainly compared to England. Ireland and Scotland have had very, very low numbers. You didn't mention Samuel Beckett, Karen Harris. I did not, but thank you for mentioning him. Is he revered and honoured there? Yes, very much. I mentioned James Joyce. Samuel Beckett was almost like James Joyce's protege. He started his professional life working as James Joyce's assistant almost, and he was, but then he became a huge playwright. But yeah, hugely revered. Although he, like Joyce, lived in Paris for most of his life. Is the Irish Woolen Mill still open? Oh yes, yes, the Irish Woolen Mills will always be open. Is it correct that St. Patrick was actually up in County Down? Yes, that's where he first arrived in Ireland, correct. Would you recommend the jail in Dublin? Yes, I absolutely would. And thank you for bringing it up. Kilmainham Jail in Dublin is a fantastic place to visit. That's where the leaders of the 1916 rising were kept prisoner before they were executed. Ashford Castle, very good, Kathleen Duffy. Ashford Castle is a very good castle and very well worth a visit. Suggestions on where to stay. It depends on your budget, really. There's lots of lovely hotels in Ireland, and then if you have less money, there's what we call guest houses, like bed and breakfast. They're more reasonable. So yeah, it depends on your budget, really. What's the difference between muck and mac? Well, the traditional answer to that is muck is Scottish and mac is Irish, but the people in Ireland and Scotland changed over so many times that the two became completely confused, and there's basically no difference. What about ethnic diversity? Are there many people of African descent in Ireland? There are these days, actually. Yes, there wasn't for a long time, but now there is plenty of people, refugees. Ireland's had a lot of refugees coming into the country, and you see a lot more people of colour, people from Africa, and Chinese people of Chinese descent. Yes, so the answer is yes, as there is a lot. Could you talk about the wool and garment industry? It's not something I know a great deal about, I'm afraid. I might have to look that up. Can you talk about the native people from Ireland before the Spanish invaded? Okay, the Spanish didn't invade. The Spanish, what I'm saying is basically prehistoric Ireland is very hard to know about because people didn't write things down. So the first evidence of people in Ireland is around 8000 BC. And these people, they've done certain tests and they've found they have a lot in common with people from the area of Spain called Galicia. So they think that there's a good chance that people from Galicia originally went over to Spain, but probably people at the same time went over from Scotland as well. So it's very hard to trace, but there's certainly no invasion. It's just tracing the origins of the people in Ireland. Gary Livingston, thank you.
Okay. I think you've addressed all the questions. That was awesome.
I tried. Yeah.
So you did. You even addressed the questions about your questions. So
yes.
So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate you staying on for the Q&A. I personally love the Q&A because I always learn things during the Q&A, and I think it's wonderful. Sadly, all good things must come to an end, and this tour is one of them. So I will be closing it out. Please feel free to go and see the other virtual tours that are coming up and sign up for them, and we will see you in a week or so on one of them. In the meanwhile, have fun at home and enjoy your surroundings. Go travel local. All right? Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.